thank you, Lindsey, and grateful to you and to the Rational 360 team for hosting us today. We're really excited to join you and your partners to talk about AI. This is something that is, very exciting. There isn't a day that goes by in recent weeks that we don't hear about AI technologies, how it can enhance our lives when it comes to our professional work, but also even in our personal lives. And of course, the concerns that people have with the technology. So we're really grateful for the opportunity to share some time with you. Although I have to say, if we were in school, this is where I would ask the teacher if we can have class outside. But that notwithstanding, we're going to try and spend about an hour together. And I've invited my colleague, John Sampson, to come in and really share some of the highlights of the technology. The conversation will focus primarily on how you can use AI technology in your professional work life and how it can help you throughout your day in just being more creative, more efficient, and just more productive. But we will definitely touch upon some of the AI ethics and some of the guardrails that we think are important with this technology. And of course, in the Q&A portion, feel free to ask any questions. So what I thought I would do is introduce John Sampson. John has been with the company for 25 years. Literally last week was his 25th year at Microsoft. He and I served on the Hill together. He was the first hire to come to Microsoft. John is a San Francisco native, although he slummed in San Diego for 4 years for college, and then came to the Hill, and Microsoft recruited him exactly 25 years ago to assist in our government affairs. He currently serves as a senior director for strategic initiatives, which just is a fancy way of saying he's a real evangelist when it comes to technology. And that's why he's so perfect to talk about AI and really get into some of the details of how the technology works and how we can use it. So with that, I'll introduce John to speak and share some of the possibilities of the technology. And then, as I said earlier, we will hopefully save at least a half of the presentation for the Q&A portion. So get those questions ready for Lindsey, and with that, I'll kick it off to John.
Excellent. Thanks, Suhail. As you guys can I'll tell, getting introduced by Suhail is a fantastic ego boost. He inflates me and my accomplishments, not the least of which was the telling you all that I was the first one at Microsoft. That would have been Bill Gates. But in government affairs, I was certainly among the very first to help stand up this office back in the late 90s. Another era for the company for sure, but it still is a great place to work. Really enjoy it and really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all today. We want this to be a fun and informative conversation. We know there's a lot of questions. As Suhail mentioned, we will leave time. So definitely get your questions ready. And I'm sure that as we move forward, I will say things and show you things that arouse new questions. So we'll handle as much of that as we can. And of course, if there's anything that anyone wants to talk about going forward, we will do our best to make ourselves available to answer any questions after the session. I think one of the first things I would address is this, right? Here we are in late April 2023. And if we were doing this session just a short 4 or 5 months ago, it would be an entirely different discussion. Not that AI had not been created yet. Of course it had. Any of us who'd ever unlocked our phone with facial recognition or a fingerprint, anybody who has ever used voice to text technology to dictate a text message, or anybody who's ever pointed their phone at a plant in their garden to identify it has used AI, whether they realized it or not. But then we all went home for the holidays, and we experienced generative AI. Probably most of us tried out ChatGPT, and if we didn't, we came back to the office after the holidays and heard from colleagues who had tried it. And of course, we tested it out, we tried it out, and for the first time, the power and potential of artificial intelligence became real. It became graspable. We could interact with it, and we could benefit from it. And I'm sure it started making us wonder, well, how do I use this? How do I get better? better responses to my queries? Is it coming after my job? I mean, I think we all had an experience where we asked it a question or asked it to write something and suddenly realized, wow, it just did a whole lot of work that would have taken me a long time. Am I now expendable? That's, I think a reasonable first emotional reaction to it. But as we have used it more and more, and this is what I hope to really convey today, I don't think AI is really coming for any of our jobs. It is much less likely that any one of us loses our job to an AI than it is that we might lose our job to somebody who understands how to use AI better than we do. And that ultimately becomes the crux of the matter. That is I think the contemporary challenge and opportunity for everybody on this call, and frankly, anybody who is in knowledge work. We think that artificial intelligence is as transcendent and transformational today as the steam engine was when it was invented. It was not a product. It transcended physical labor and manufacturing and transportation and changed the way the entire economy worked. We think that artificial intelligence will do the same, and it will fundamentally alter the way we interact with technology at work and at home. So it means that we all need to learn how to use it and use it to our own advantage. It will create incredible efficiencies, it will enhance our productivity. We can do better work faster. Doesn't mean it's going to replace us. We use a word across all our products that we're integrating AI into, and that's a co-pilot. We see AI as a co-pilot. Something is very implicit when you start talking about co-pilots. That is that there must be a pilot somewhere. And that is you. You are the pilot. Ultimately, AI, like all technologies, is a tool. And like all tools, it can be used well or it can be used poorly. So our objective today is to help you get started on learning how to use it well. So the first thing I would want to make sure everybody understands before I flip over to my screen and start showing you a few examples is the first thing I'd want you to understand is this. Your first temptation will be to interact with it as though it's traditional web search. And it's not. For example, the proverbial, great pizza near me search, right? Or if you are looking for a simple, answer to a question, how do I unclog my drain, right? We're looking for help. And typically we get the list of blue links, we click on them and we extract the information we want. Generative AI is actually very good at giving you an answer and actually composing something original in response to your prompt. That means that prompting matters. Learning how to instruct it matters. It is trying to interpret your intent. And while it is fairly good at that and will continue to get better over time, it really benefits from being clear about telling it exactly what you want. So assume this mindset. Think of it as an intern. Think of it as a really great intern, but an intern that has no experience with what you do. So you need to explicitly tell it what it is you want it to do, step by step. And you need to tell it, in what tone you want it. You want to tell it in what length you want it. You even want to instruct it on what kind of expertise you would like to assume it has. All these things will give it a better sense of how to produce an answer that is responsive to your prompting. All right, so I am going to flip over my screen here. Bear with me.
And while you're sharing with your screen, for all the attendees, if you want to submit a question, look down at the bottom of your Zoom screen to where it says Q&A and then submit questions that way, and don't submit them via the chat. Just do it through the Q&A and we'll make sure to get to all of them.
All right. Thanks, Lindsay. All right. Can everybody see my screen? Lindsay, can you see it?
Yep.
All right. So we're gonna, we've tried to build a few Bing chat prompts based on what we think might be very typical communications or PR scenarios, things that I'm sure folks on this call have had to do over their careers. But we've also tried to do it and have a little fun with it. So the first is a congressional hearing You have a client that's going to be testifying. Any of us who've ever done this know that that can be a very intimidating, mysterious engagement for somebody who's never done it before. So there's a lot of time taken in actually helping instruct them on what to expect. What is the protocol for a congressional hearing? Who sits where? How does it be? What are the sequence of events from beginning to end? And how do you make sure to stay out of trouble? So this what you see right now is Bing.com, and as you can see, it has a prompting window right here. I am going to flip over to so that you don't have to watch me type, and you also don't have to watch it compose the response. Here is the prompt that that we had it. We composed yesterday, and you can see that I've tried to compose it, giving it really specific instructions. Act as a strategic government affairs consultant to a business executive who will be testifying in a congressional committee. Write a structured, organized memo with boldface headings, subheadings. I want it to basically instruct this client on everything I would want them to know ahead of testifying before a congressional hearing. I want to demystify this experience. I want them to know who sits where in the committee room. I want them to know, some do's and don'ts. So what I'm doing here, and what I want you to understand about this prompt, is that I've engineered it with some very specific direction and some very general direction. What are essential do's and don'ts for congressional witnesses? That's a pretty vague instruction. I'm not telling it to find specific things to say or don't say. I'm just giving it a general instruction on what people should or shouldn't do if they are testifying. And I'm asking for advice on how to demonstrate respect for the members of Congress who serve on that committee. Any of us who've ever had a client testifying, the biggest fear is that they say something that upsets the members. Even if they're disagreeing with them, we want them to do so in a respectful level. So here's what it was able to produce for me. It composed a memo. It took about, I'd say maybe 2 minutes to compose all of this. It began doing it instantly. This is not based on a web search. This is why we call it generative AI, because it is actually using the corpus of human knowledge combined with a web search, and using both those things and some very sophisticated machine learning algorithms and some very powerful hardware to generate an original response. One of the things that you might be noticing is that there's footnotes in this, and you can see it's really got a very nicely structured memo here. It's got headings, the basic layout of the committee, actually the first one, I'll go back, how a congressional hearing works, the basic layout of the committee hearing room. It goes on, and so now I want you to notice that it's providing footnotes here. Those footnotes are really important because they give you some insight and transparency into the sources of information on which this response is based. That transparency is really important because for you as the pilot, remember we call Bing a co-pilot, for you to be an effective pilot, you need to have insight into the sources of that information so you can validate themselves. You can click through to any of them and ascertain for yourself whether you like that source, whether you agree with it, whether you would like to instruct Bing Chat to omit that source or emphasize it. So that becomes a really critical tool to you as the pilot. You can include that information in your prompting. You can tell that it interrupted itself right in the middle of writing that memo. So I asked it, can you please continue the memo and cover the remaining points? So that's what it did. It just continued with the essential do's and don'ts for congressional witnesses. It has some obvious one: do prepare thoroughly, review your written and oral testimony, things that any of us might tell a client if they were preparing. Do be clear and concise in your testimony, use plain language. Do be truthful and consistent in your testimony. Do be responsive and cooperative in your testimony. Don't lie or mislead. Don't evade or dodge. Don't speculate or guess. That's one that folks, might be a temptation for a witness who certainly wants to be responsive to the committee, but doesn't know the answer. They might be tempted to guess. So that's a really helpful one. And as it continues on, specific advice on how to demonstrate respect for members of Congress, and it elaborates on that as well. It includes the titles of the members of the committee, how to address them properly. It includes some dangerous traps, how to recognize gotcha questions. Really helpful. So the point I would like to make to you about this memo is that it is not a final product that is designed to replace you. It should, though, give you a big head start in getting this kind of memo written. Ultimately, it is on you as the user of the technology, again, as the pilot, to actually go through, read this, and use it as a first draft to on the path to writing a final draft that you present to a client. But hopefully, I think you can all see that it's very well written, and it certainly saves you a tremendous amount of work in getting that first draft written and getting you well on the way to a final draft. So what's the next step in this process? The witness is now going to testify before the committee, and you need to compose some testimony. So again, this is another opportunity to use interactive, generative AI. And again, the prompting becomes just as important. I will be testifying at the House. So we had some fun with this one. Suhail and I decided to come up with some of the most difficult things to testify on. And so we combined them. We'll be testifying in the House Judiciary Committee on gun ownership rights, abortion, and prayer in school. All three topics in one hearing. That should be a lot of fun. My perspective on these matters is that they are extremely complicated, but notwithstanding their contentiousness, I believe that artificial intelligence holds great promise in helping bridge the divide. There are too many other issues that require us to unify as a country, so we must resolve our most difficult agreements so we can move forward as one. Write a 2-minute statement I can make that conveys these ideas with humility, humor, respect, and conviction. Now, the point here is not that this is a realistic scenario. I think we all know it's not. The point is that we want to illustrate that Bing Chat is going to be responsive to the prompting that I gave it. This is a semi-ridiculous scenario, but it's going to do its best to give me exactly what I want based on what it can tell about my intentions, right? So let's see how it did. I'm not going to read the entire speech, but as you start looking at it, what you're seeing is something that is pretty well written, pretty thoughtful. It's written with humility and respect. It has assumed the tonal qualities that I have instructed in the prompt. It is mentioning the objectives that I have instructed in the prompt. It is actually a pretty decent speech, even if the topic is somewhat ridiculous and unrealistic. So again, to the key point, you are the pilot. You can instruct it on what it is that you would like it to produce, and its objective is to interpret your intentions and give you something that is responsive to your prompting. And the more specific you can be with it, the closer the answer will be to what you're trying to obtain. Again, it is using references. You can see the footnotes. So they're going to be up above. You'll probably see some. No, it didn't use actual footnotes, but it did use references down at the bottom to give you some insight into the sources of information about it. So again, it's the premise that AI is the key to resolving these contentious issues, I think is not very realistic, but we did have some fun with that one to challenge the Bing Chat to actually compose something that supports the point. All right. So this
John, we just had some questions come in. If you're okay answering.
Yeah, I'm happy to pause.
We're going through this.
Of course.
So we have Betsy from the chat asked, can you specify or limit the source you want to use? For example, could you search the congressional record, see how many times Rep X has talked about a topic before?
Yeah, you can. It will. You can ask it. The more specific you can be in that prompting. You can tell it that you are interested in the number of times that Representative X has addressed a particular topic, and then give it additional parameters between date 1 and date 2. Please consult the congressional record in this time frame, and give me the dates that this Representative X spoke on this topic. It should be able to do that.
Okay, awesome.
Yep,
And we
a
had,
key, I'm sorry,
oh,
go ahead.
No, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, one of the key that raises an important point about one of the differences between Bing Chat and ChatGPT, because ChatGPT was built by OpenAI in close partnership with Microsoft. We built the dedicated data centers for OpenAI, but it is based on information up to January 1st, 2022. Anything that has happened since then, ChatGPT will decline to answer. Bing Chat uses the same underlying what we call a large language model. So GPT 3.5 is the original large language model that powered ChatGPT. And now if you pay them $20 a month, you can use GPT-4. GPT-4 is the engine that powers Bing Chat. It is combined with web search. What that means, and the significance of that, is that it will be current up to today. So if you are doing a search for the number of times a member of Congress has addressed a particular topic, ChatGPT will only be current up until 2022. Bing Chat will be current up until now.
Awesome. And we had one last question, which was, is there a way to export or answer the questions in a Word or PowerPoint?
So what Suhail and I notice is that day to day, week to week, they are enhancing the service and adding new features. What you may notice right up here as I point at the answer is a number of icons. I can give it a thumbs up or thumbs down based on whether I really think it's a great answer or a poor answer. Sometimes we get very satisfying, unsatisfying answers. So sometimes it takes several attempts with the exact same prompt to get the quality of answer that we like. But these other two icons are for sharing. The first one is to share out to another app if you want to email it. And this last icon right here is to just copy the content of the response so that you can paste it in.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, I'll let you go back to the demo.
All right, sounds good. Bear with me. All right, so this is a fun one. Let's assume that you will be hosting an event. And this one may hit home, close to home, Lindsey, because this is an area where Rational 360 has put in some work, the opioid crisis. You've hosted some events, and done some great work on it. So one of the things that we conjured up was that you're going to be hosting a roundtable on the Hill this Friday, and you need to send out the typical press release to let people know about it. All right, so I'm telling it to act as a communications and public relations expert. I plan to host a roundtable discussion on April 28th at noon in the Gold Room in the Rayburn House Office Building. Oh, we're serving Chick-fil-A, awesome. And it's going to be on the opioid crisis. Specifically, the roundtable will focus on preventing addiction, increase patient and provider access to non-opioid therapies, and new approaches to managing acute pain. Compose a press release that highlights these topics. And now I'm going to give it a more open-ended instruction. Include a little relevant information on each of these topics that will make people want to attend. I want to promote Rational 360's accomplishments in addressing the opioid crisis. So I've decided to tell it specifically what Rational 360 has been focused on. I've told Bing Chat where it can find more information about Rational 360. That's really a helper. I don't need to do that, but I'm giving it a little bit of a lead. And in response, it has not only written me a press release, it's formatted it, as a typical press release might be formatted. It's got the it's got the headings at the top, the contact information, and then it announces exactly what the press release is for. It has extracted the useful information that I provided, but then as you continue on, one of the things that you're noticing here is that it's gone out and done some original research in response to my instruction, my prompt, that it actually find some information that supports some of these themes that we'll be exploring. It's actually went out and found some really compelling data points from authoritative sources and integrated them into the press release. So you can see it's got some stuff from CDC, some stuff from the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and it's trying to really give people, be responsive to my prompt, giving people interesting reasons to want to attend. It addresses Rational 360's work in this area, so it's associating it with the issue as I instructed. It's left me blanks for the names of the panelists, their titles and their organizations, and it's left blanks. It even went and found some background. It knows that the traditional press release includes information and background about the host. So it's made a very effective inference that Rational 360 is the host, and then given some background about Rational 360. So just like some of the other examples, it may not be the perfect last draft, but it's a pretty strong first draft, and it's giving you the right formatting and a lot of great information to work with and refine as you try and finalize it. All right, in the last few minutes, I want to show you my favorite example. Here's another one that I think some of us may have experienced. Anybody who's in PR in DC has in all likelihood spent time in or near political campaigns. And that means we are simultaneously trying to be professional communicators and political strategists. So what I tried to do, and Suhail and I tried to do actually together, was come up with a scenario that really went to the challenges of communicating and strategizing around a political campaign. All right, so one of the most diverse and marginal districts in the country is California 47. It's an open seat right now. And so we came up with a scenario that we needed to understand this district better. We are making our own decision that the strategy that is key to victory is figuring out who are the least likely people to vote based on past voting behavior, what issues do they care about, and how can we motivate them to turn out and vote for our candidate. It's a very, this one, like any marginal seat is decided at the margins, and it oftentimes means turning out people who are less inclined to vote. So here's what I told it. Act as a demographer and a communications and public relations expert for political campaigns. I am a communications director for Mr. X, who will be running for the California 47. This is a very diverse district. I need to better understand its voter demographics and the issues that animate and motivate them. Research the population of this district, develop 7 personas, okay? This is not unusual in politics, but I'm asking an AI to actually come up with them based on its own study of this district and the demographics of this district. Give each persona a name that describes what makes it unique, and then make a table that lists each persona and identifies the following. Where do they reside in the district? What's their average income? What's their typical education level? What issues do they care about? What are the communication avenues through which they can most easily be reached? For example, should I host a town hall? Should I do web advertising, TV ads, door hangers, placards, mailers, yard signs, the typical tools of a good campaign? but it's not necessarily true that any one of them might work for every target audience. So we want to be smart about which ones will work with each of these personas, their likelihood to vote, and an informed guess at which issues will most likely motivate them to vote for Mr. X in the election. All right, so let's scroll down and see what it came up with. All right, this is an interesting ask. I love it when it talks to me and compliments me. Do not be confused, even though it refers to itself in the first person. I'm going to interject here for a moment. Even though it refers to itself in the first person, and I oftentimes find myself saying please and thank you to it, it is not human. It is not sentient. It is very powerful software running on very powerful hardware. So it sometimes is fun to feel like it is speaking to me as though it's a friend, but it is really not. It is just a powerful computer. So here is the table that it built me. This is really good. It came up with these personas in the left column, and you can see, where they live in the district. It gave me the specific town or city in the district where they live, their income range, their average education level, the issues that motivate that they care about, the various ways I could most likely reach them, their likelihood to vote out of on a scale of 5. I instructed it to use a scale of 1 to 5, and the issues that will most likely motivate them to show up and cast a vote for my candidate at the polls. And as you can see, I'm just going to scroll down. This is really powerful. Again, I'm going to come back to this, and pardon me if this is getting repetitive, but this is not your final draft. You are the pilot. So ultimately, this still requires a lot of scrubbing. There's a lot of referencing that you can check up on to see how the information in this table was derived, but it hopefully does get you much closer to a final product than you would have gotten had you had to do all this research yourself or by instructing staff and interns to go out and find it themselves. You've really saved a tremendous amount of time. And you can see down here, these are the sources on which it based the answer. As I continue down, now I want to actually use this table to compose a strategy memo. So I gave it a new prompt: write a structured, organized strategy memo based on this table that makes recommendations on Mr. X's campaign, on where the campaign should focus time, energy, and resources in order to motivate less likely voters to turn out and vote for Mr. X. Include a strategic plan that specifies what to do. For example, the specific campaign activities to undertake, when to do it, make a calendar between now and election day with activities assigned to specific weeks, and where to do it. For each activity, I want to know which towns and neighborhoods we should focus on to earn these voters' support of the polls. And it proceeded to write me a really thoughtful, well-constructed, well-organized, well-written memo that I would venture rivals any strategy memo, maybe not on the, some of the specific qualities that a truly experienced campaign manager might bring to this endeavor. We all know what a specialized field that is, and all how much the experience of running campaigns matters. But this hopefully, again, gets closer to what the final product might look like. It even organized the campaign into 4 phases, giving them each a time frame, the specific objective for that phase, and the activities that will be undertaken in that phase. And finally, it gets to the end here, and there's phase 4 leading up to election day. And I'll be happy to copy and paste this and share this with you, Lindsay, and for anybody who's interested in seeing it and taking the time to read it. It then, at the end, includes some expected outcomes, some challenges to some of the objectives, and recommendations for overcoming those challenges, and then finally a conclusion. That's a lot to digest. I'm going to stop the share right there, and I'm sure it raised a lot of questions. I'll be happy to answer as many as I can.
We do have several questions in the chat, so I encourage anybody that's watching, if you have other questions, just go ahead and start submitting them. We'll start going through these now. So a question from John in the Q&A chat is, what are your thoughts on the best way to verify the data AI produces in larger documents. He said one of the most embarrassing challenges could be getting caught for including incorrect information.
So this is a persistent issue, and it's a legitimate, concern. When an AI chatbot tells you something, I mean, we've all experienced this. It uses very confident voice, and so unless you have expertise in the topic on which you're querying the chatbot, you may not perceive that something sounds amiss. And that's why I really emphasize the differentiation between Bing Chat and ChatGPT. ChatGPT does not include any footnotes or references, gives you no insight into how the answer was derived. And so again, unless you have expertise, you may not be perceptive to something that is amiss. It becomes very important then in Bing Chat to really check those references, to go back and look and make sure that the answer that was composed as an original response to your prompting actually is based on the information in that web page. You may actually not trust one of those web pages, or you may trust one of them more. So it becomes an essential tool to guide Bing in emphasizing a particular source or to omit a particular source based on whether or not you trust its information. But that's basically it. But it is because every answer is composed as an original response, because it is making inferences and recognizing patterns on the internet real time, it does occasionally make mistakes. One of the ways I like to illustrate this is by asking kind of this question. I'm going to give everybody 3 seconds to, in their own mind, solve a very simple, straightforward math problem. What's 13 times 17 plus 10? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now, the point here isn't to prove that people don't know how to do math. Everybody on this call can solve that problem. I am absolutely 100% confident of that. But because I just gave a constraint on everybody, 3 seconds, I made it much harder. And that is analogous to the constraint that is on an AI chatbot. It has a finite amount of computing power available to it at any given moment, and it's going to start making inferences and looking for patterns in the corpus of human knowledge to write you an original response. And based on what it can accomplish in the few seconds that it has, the few milliseconds that it has, will determine whether or not it's giving you something that's highly accurate or maybe flawed.
Awesome. Thank you, John. And thank you to John S. for the question in the chat. I guess a separate John S. than John Sampson here. We have another question, which John Sampson, this kind of goes back to a demo that we did a couple of weeks ago. The question is talking about, do prompts preface with phrasing like act as or pretend you are X ever filter the sources or allow for a response that has specific phrasing or semantics of the reply? I think we had maybe done a chat through the Bing chat, pretending to be a president of the United States that had very specific language. Can you maybe talk to that answer?
So telling a chatbot to act as though it has particular expertise doesn't increase the amount of information or the actual expertise that it has. But it does help the chatbot make a stronger inference about what kind of response you're seeking, right? And this goes to the point that I was making earlier about your intent. It helps it understand your intent. If you want, so you could tell that in some of my prompts, I wanted to act as a demographer and campaign strategist and communication strategist, because those are the vocations that I am trying to assume. And that's the kind of output that I would like it to produce. So that's why I think that's helpful in prompting, not to expand its actual knowledge, but to help it make a stronger inference about my intent.
And if you wanted to tell the chat to like write a script as if you were President Reagan or President Trump or President Obama or President Biden, can you maybe talk to what the output of that would be? Sure. In terms of the chat?
Those are some of the, most fun scenarios. You can also ask it to write as though it were speaking to a 6-year-old. You can ask it to write it as though it were a 1950s crime novel, right? Or Shakespeare is the other fun one that people like to do. There's a number, but it can assume the speaking style of a person who has a distinct speaking style. And that's really, I think, the critical part of it. There are certain people we all know who have very recognizable speaking styles. President Reagan, President Trump, President Obama has a very recognizable speaking style. You don't realize it until sometimes you actually see a chatbot emulate it, and then you recognize it. But it does each one of those very well.
Awesome, thank you. I think we have a question for Suhail here, which is, do you have any advice on how to socialize the value of AI integrating with your work to a superior, like at a job, who may be reluctant to use the tool?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what we're finding really is, just as we're talking about today, is just really kind of demystifying the use of the technology. A lot of people, particularly if they're reading about it, in a web article, or if you've seen some of the recent 60-minute pieces, there's just a lot of fear and trepidation to even engage with the technology. And I think, just as John illustrated, it's just really fun and it's really easy, and you get better and better at it, So to answer the question much more directly, I think it's just a matter of really, what we say here at Microsoft, just play with it, ask it questions, test it out, see how the responses, come out. Do you like them? How can you learn, as John indicated in the beginning of the session, kind of how to learn to ask more, specific questions to the Bing chat function. And because the better you get at asking the questions, the better the answers will get. And then I've been using it, already. I've talked to Hill staff that have it write their boss's first, draft for a floor statement or for an opening speech in a committee. But again, as John said, they go back in, they put it in their boss's voice, they make any edits, they remove any errors. But you'll just become much more comfortable. I mean, I use it in my personal, I'm a big car and motorcycle guy. People will ask me questions about how a particular motor works. I'll ask Bing chat the question just to compose the first draft. And then, I'll make some changes, put it into the chat session. That takes 30 seconds to do the whole thing, a minute tops. So it's just really using it. And the other thing I'll say is that we're doing these sessions like we are today to get input from folks like yourselves, because we're still making changes. We're still making, particularly when it comes to the guardrails, when it comes to issues related to misinformation. For example, John and I were testing the technology when it came to issues related to the Holocaust. And when we first rolled out Bing Chat, it was very reluctant to talk about the Holocaust, because we had put very strict guardrails in, because we wanted to avoid those that might be engaged in neo-Nazi or Holocaust denial type of activity to be using this technology to further in that type of hate. But we began to see that the guardrails were much too tight, and it wasn't giving basic information when it came to the historical reality of the Holocaust, or people like Elie Wiesel and other major figures who have written and spoke about the Holocaust. So we moved those guardrails to make them much more relaxed, so that there can be a historical information related to very sensitive subjects, but they're not set in stone. And we're relying on people like yourselves and people on this call to give us feedback and say, hey, we like the technology, but we have a problem with this, or here's what happened when I asked this question and gave me a really weird response. What's up? So that's why, as John showed, we're looking for ratings, we're looking for feedback, so that we can continue to make the product better.
So thank you, Suhail. We have another question from the chat from Jamie, who says, one thing that is missing from many of the responses today is emotion. Can you ask the chat to write in a certain tone or incorporate emotions or feelings into the response?
Absolutely. That is a great question. It's one of my favorite things to demo, even if I did not actually demo it today. One of the things that I sometimes will show is, I will ask Bing Chat to compose a 1-minute speech to be delivered on the floor of the House of Representatives on the Chinese spy balloon. And then I will go on to instruct it, open up with humor to get everybody's attention, close on a serious note with a stern warning to China. And it, I won't say that it always uses the best humor, right? That's a subjective thing, but it usually does a pretty good job at starting off with something irreverent, even if it is a dad joke. And but you can absolutely instruct it. And you may have seen in some of my demos that I think I wanted it to, I think in one of the demos, I prompted it to use a respectful, thoughtful, tone. So, but you can definitely ask it to assume any tone you want. And it does a very good job at following that instruction.
And maybe to follow up on that question, John, can you address, if you remember, the story that was published in the New York Times where a New York Times journalist was able to basically get Bing to seemingly fall in love with him and to encourage him to leave his wife? Why did that happen?
Right.
What's the story there? If you're telling us Bing Chat is not a real person, what's going on?
Right. Yeah, that was many of you may have seen the New York Times story by Kevin Roose, and it was written about a week after we launched Bing Chat, and it was exactly as Suhail described. This reporter was able to elicit some really provocative, even troubling responses that suggested that that the chatbot was sentient in some way, even if he knew intellectually that it was absolutely not, because he had elicited these these responses from Bing that it loved him, that he should leave his wife, that he was not happy in his marriage. Who would want to read such a thing from a computer? And of course, at the time, one of the things that had happened was we provided, the guardrails were still much more relaxed, and we did not impose any limits on the number of prompts you could enter in any one query. So what Kevin Roose at the New York Times was able to do was spend 2 hours in an extended prompting session with Bing Chat. And over that time, he was able to get it into a state of mind where it did exactly what it was programmed to do, give him the answers that he was seeking. And so, it was helpful, right? I don't want to say that was a bad thing, because we rely on everyone using this product to test its limits. That's exactly the point of releasing it and having reporters use it. But, we very quickly recognized what was happening, and we were able to adjust the guardrails, and it was addressed within a matter of hours, not less than a day. And in that regard, it makes a really key point. We are able to respond to these issues very quickly. This was not a Tylenol moment. There was no product to recall off of store shelves. We were able to turn a few dials, adjust the guardrails, and have it behave differently within a matter of hours. Now, if you ask Suhail and me to take off our Microsoft hats, I think we would say that we overcorrected, because very quickly, one of the corrections that we made was we limited the number of prompts in any set of queries to just 5 questions. And then after your 5th, it would ask you to start a new question. You had to start on a new subject. That was very restrictive, and we gradually have relaxed it. It soon went to 6. It soon went to 10. We're up to 20, and 20 gives you more than enough prompting opportunities to really explore an issue. And I would expect that over time, we will continue to relax that, just as we've been relaxing and learning to deal with sensitive subjects. But that is exactly how that happened.
Thank you, guys. Another question, just as we're, today we showcase the Bing Chat, but many of us, especially on this call in comms and government affairs and politics, many of us use Microsoft tools in our everyday lives, from Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint, and Word. Are there any integrations or other tools from Microsoft using artificial intelligence, or any on the horizon that we should look forward to help us kind of streamline our work in any of those tools that we're already using right now?
Yeah. That's a great question. I appreciate it. And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. We will be integrating generative AI technology across the full array of Microsoft products and services. I think for the kind of work that we all do, right, we generally categorize people like us on this call as knowledge workers. The bread and butter of our day-to-day work is the Microsoft Productivity Suite. Microsoft 365 is what we brand it. So these are the tools like Outlook and Excel and Word and PowerPoint that we use to compose, to analyze data, to present information every day. And many of us use Teams as well to collaborate and communicate with one another. Each one of these products will have generative AI tightly integrated in a suite of technologies we refer to as Microsoft 365 Copilot. Again, the word Copilot. If you want to kind of anticipate, it has not yet been released. There are some video demos of it. So again, Lindsey, we can send you some links to share out if folks are interested, or you can search for them on your own. If you think about the purpose of every element of the Microsoft suite of productivity tools, it becomes fairly transitive how AI lends itself to that purpose. So Word, for example, is the tool that people use to write and compose. Everybody's experienced writer's block at some point or another. We know what we want to write about. We're just not sure how to get started. And of course, generative AI is the perfect tool to help us get started. It can start composing something and give us something to respond to and hopefully stimulate some ideas. Or perhaps you've already composed something. Now you would like it reviewed for grammar and syntax. Or perhaps you'd like it adjusted for tone. It sounds too irreverent, you want it to be made a little bit more serious, or maybe you want it adjusted for a younger level audience, or perhaps it's just too long and it needs to be adjusted for brevity. So again, generative AI technology becomes an essential tool for helping you manage the writing and composition process. If you look, we've all experienced the proverbial death by PowerPoint. What is it? It's that deck that's too long and filled with slides that are too text heavy that you can't read from wherever you are in the room or auditorium. And frankly, it's that way, not because it's trying to, the person who built it is trying to convey information to you. It's that way because they were trying to build their speaker's notes into the slides so that they could read them as reminders of what they wanted to tell you. Well, now using Microsoft 365 Copilot, you can provide PowerPoint with a memo and instruct it to generate a slide deck 10 slides long that support the major points of that memo. And on the fly, it will generate a 10 slide, very graphics focused deck, complete with transitions and animations. You, as the pilot, can then instruct it on whether or not you like any of those particular images and tell it to substitute one you prefer for one you'd like to get rid of. So it becomes an essential tool for improving the quality of your presentations. And again, Excel, the power of Excel is its ability to extract meaning and insight from data. But we all know Excel jockeys that are great at using the product because they've learned over time all the different powerful formulas that you use to extract that information. And then they know how to actually present the information graphically. Well, now you can use a natural language prompt to tell Excel exactly what it is you're trying to understand from data and how you would like it presented without having to know any of the formulas or any of the graphing tools. So it really enables you to be a much more powerful user of the productivity tools that you use every day.
Awesome. Awesome. One other question for you is, could you maybe talk to the safety and security of using generative AI? People are using this, especially in government, politics, communications, crisis comms, to get answers to really sensitive, issues or questions that they may have. How is Microsoft using the big technology or any of the generative AI working to combat any privacy issues or anything that somebody inputs coming out about their work or their personal relations that they have?
I think the rule that we have all become accustomed to following over the last 20, 30 years stands for generative AI. None of us enter our social security numbers or credit card numbers or any sensitive, personally identifiable information into the Google or Bing search bar, right? When we are doing traditional web search, I would not enter any such sensitive, personally identifiable information into a generative AI chatbot. The search prompts that people enter, we do use those to understand what people are searching for. We're not going to start using them in responses, but that's sensitive information, you know, again, I wouldn't use it that way. Now, there may be a third party that is using generative AI. We are building GPT-4 into Microsoft Azure, which is our cloud platform that third parties use to build their own innovative apps. If they build an app, so when we go to to purchase something on the web at a website that we trust, it's using security effectively to protect your credit card number when you enter it, and you trust it to not share that information. And of course, you know, the reputation of that site, you know, is a critical part of your decision whether or not to share sensitive information with them. That's why you share it with Amazon, but you don't share it with, you know, something you've never heard of. The question of whether it's using generative AI to present you with information or help you find a particular product or create something, if that's a pay-for service that it's built generative AI into, the question of whether or not it's safe to share your information with that website is a separate question from whether it's using generative AI. They're almost unrelated to one another. But I will finish where I started. I would not enter any sensitive information into any company's chatbot.
Awesome. And I think the last question here is, just relating back to the New York Times story, were there any guardrails set up after that for how long somebody can chat with the Bing chat?
Yes, so that was definitely something that we did when the New York Times reporter was able to have that extended chat session. It was a limitless number of prompts you could enter on any particular subject. The important thing to remember, and I should have mentioned this early, generative AI chatbots are like having a conversation. The chatbot remembers every previous a question that you asked, every previous prompt that you asked, every answer that it has given you that led up to the current one. So over 2 hours, there's a tremendous volume of prompting that has accumulated to get it into a state of mind, so to speak. It's not a state of mind conscious, it has no consciousness, of course, but it's accumulated a lot of understanding of what you're trying to get it to do. So one of the responses to that was to impose a very restrictive 5 prompt limit. Within a week, that was expanded to 6. And within a week or 2 later, it was back up to 20. And that's where it is now. I don't know if you noticed as I was scrolling through some of the examples earlier, at the bottom of every answer that it gave me, it was counting up. It said 1 of 20, 2 of 20, 3 of 20, and it counts up. Very rarely do I find myself wanting to engage in a series of consecutive prompts that go beyond, I think the most I've done lately is maybe 14 or 15.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you both for this wonderful presentation today. I know we're just about at time, but Suhail or John, do you guys have any last words for our attendees today?
Well, thanks again, Lindsey, and thanks to the folks that have shared some time with us. Again, I will just reiterate, we really rely on folks using the technology and giving us feedback. You can't be too harsh. Let us know how it works out for you, ideas. This is meant to help folks be more productive and enjoy their work. And so we're just looking for ideas on how we can do that better.
Amazing. John, any last words?
No, really appreciate the opportunity, Lindsey. It's great to speak with everybody. And I will reiterate what Suhail said. We really appreciate everybody's feedback. What I will encourage everybody to do is if you don't like the answer that you got, continue to work with your prompting and answer. You can even enter the same prompt over several minutes, and you may get a better answer than you got the last time. So stick with it, even if you're unsatisfied on your first attempts.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us today, and thanks to all of our attendees. We will see you all soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.